Hello and welcome here to Best of the West, a National League West podcast here for Blake Street Banner. I am your host, Skylar Timmons, joined here, as always, once again by Kenneth Weber, wearing a hat with basically a red bird eagle falcon thingy on
The
it.
real ones know. So this is the Miami of Ohio Redhawks logo. But for the local scene, this was a long time Redhawks logo for the men's league. So just keeping the old man beer league alive over here.
There you go. Is it cold up in the Denver area there,
It
Kenneth?
is February in Denver. It is definitely cold. Yes. So
it's
yeah,
down here in the valley.
getting some snow for sure. So this is that time of year where it's supposed to be cold, but when it's April and May and it's doing this, then you're gonna find me really upset.
Mm-hmm. It's the wind. I can't stand the wind, and that's what's been getting us down here in the San Luis Valley. Very windy, very cold, but we can think warm thoughts, boy, because spring training is getting underway. How about that for a segue?
How about it? I was just laughing at cold butt, windy cold butt. So continue, proceed.
But spring training is getting underway as of Thursday. Oh, there's already teams reporting. Getting started. I don't know why. There's this weird staggering where some teams have all
It's
started
always,
reporting with
yeah,
their.
it's always been that way. It's always in the same like week or 4 day span, and you'll have 90% showing up on the same 2 days, and then it'll be like, oh, by the way, Milwaukee, they're showing up on the 16th.
Yeah,
Nobody knows why, but that's just what's going on. So it's weird that it's never been uniformed.
yeah, weird. But for some teams, it's a little understandable. Dodgers have all reported to camp, and they have games coming up here pretty soon. Actual games,
Real soon.
yeah, real soon. So spring training getting underway. Most all the other teams on Thursday and in the coming days, and then spring training games kick off next week. So that'll be fun. We'll have some more baseball action to actually dive into instead of theorizing and
Yeah.
trying to figure out what the heck teams are doing. We'll have some concrete stuff to talk about.
Yeah, there's going
But
to be some tangible evidence of somebody wearing number 79 out there with no name on the back. But
that's
I'm
right.
curious. I'm curious who like the scrimmage games are because every year you'll see that the Boston Red Sox are playing the University of Connecticut to kick off this Grapefruit League season. So I'm
Mhm.
curious who some of those weird, almost Globetrotters likes matchups are to start spring training this year.
Yeah. Won't the Rockies get in on that action? That'd be fun. Or do they not want to be embarrassed?
Maybe they could play the University of Colorado's baseball team. Oh wait.
Hey, they could play CSU Pueblo. My brother did that back in the day for a
They can do, yeah.
random game.
UNC Air Force. Yeah, there are some options out here. I
Mhm.
I I could be a little petty because there could be more baseball options in base or in Colorado, but
Yeah,
that would be kind of cool if Air Force showed up. Paul
they go.
Skeens, you could have seen him
Yeah,
before he was a thing.
go play the Rocky Mountain Vibes.
There you go.
Get them ready. Play some indie ball teams.
Yeah, I'd say play the Red Hawks, but we hung it up. So
But teams all reporting and figuring out things, and so the whole focus of this episode is just talking about questions about spring training and just things we're looking for heading into really the start of the baseball season. And kicking things off, let's head out to San Diego, who have last week, if you watched or listened, well, we kind of railed on them a little bit. They haven't really done anything. Their offseason's been pretty poor. Well, since then, they've been a little bit busier. They addressed left field by signing Connor Joe and Jason Hayward to be kind of a platoon out there, raise the rally banner for the Padres there. But then just coming in under the wire as we started this, getting ready to go live here, they've signed Nick Pivetta on a reportedly 4-year, $55 million deal. There's an opt out after years 2 and 3. There's a $3 million signing bonus, and he's only getting paid a base salary of $1 million this season for 25, and then it's progressing of 19 million in 26, 14 million in 27, and then 18 million in 28. So roughly 2 years, 23 million if he opts out. A little under the qualifying offer of guaranteed money. Significant decrease this season in payroll. But overall, the Padres get themselves a nice little rotation piece to add in to join the squad. So that really answered the question we were having of Are the Padres going to do anything else with the roster shakeup? So far, so good there, Kenneth.
Yeah. Yeah, when, Elias Diaz was kind of the big notable
Mhm.
transaction, things were not going well. So, we've talked about the Padres ad nauseum. In general, I like this acquisition. The first thing that stands out, and we'll flesh it out a little bit more, but a $1 million salary is almost comical for
Mhm.
a veteran major league free agent. That is a bona fide middle rotation starter. So there's obviously something to unpack with that. But overall, this feels like a compromise deal between two sides that kind of have some regrets in the late stages of the offseason, or they're making the best of whatever time is left. Because Pavetta turned down the qualifying offer. He ultimately signs for, as you mentioned, significantly less this year, but it was kind of the gamble on himself. And now this is just resetting the clock, but also resetting the clock to maybe 2 years from now, maybe three, maybe
Mhm.
four. So what's the weird part about it? It kind of feels like both sides have one foot out the door with this
Yeah.
deal. And then for Nick Pavetta in general, he fits into a weird class of pitcher for me. I think this is a good acquisition. I think this is a good place for him. And I think that this is also a good role for him. You expect him to be behind some guys. You expect some larger contributors on the mound in San Diego, but you also expect him to be a contributor as well. I think Pavetta will be a decent big league pitcher anywhere he goes, but he also kind of has that Gil Mesh, Jordan Lyles stink to him,
Mhm.
where it's just like you get paid a lot and get a lot of contracts for never quite being the guy that you'd think you were, and so there's that always there with Pavetta for me. But in terms of fit, in terms of role, and I guess in terms of deal, it makes a whole lot of sense for Pavetta and the Padres.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder too, and this kind of ties into it because what you're saying, he's one of those solid just rotation pieces to have. No, every team needs these kind of guys. They'll post up in last season with the Red Sox. No, he's been pretty good with the Red Sox. No, pretty solid. No, not
Mhm.
world changing, but pretty solid. The last season, 4.14 ERA in 27 games, 26 starts, 145 innings and 2/3 innings, 172 strikeouts, 36 walks. So solid overall numbers for the guy. So a nice addition into that rotation that now has Dylan Cease, Yu Darvish, Michael King, and then whoever kind of falls in behind them with.
If you're figuring out a number five, it's not the worst problem to have.
Mhm.
That's a solid four to start out with.
And but it also raises a question of with all the things that are going on with the Padres of what does this do for Dylan Cease? Does he finish spring training with the Padres or does he find himself on the move again? Kind of like he was last year when he got moved over to the Padres. Finds himself kind of in the midst of spring training. Well, we're going to ship him out somewhere else to relieve some payroll while kind of shoring things up with Pavetta.
Yeah, um, you know, it's It's easier to lose a cease now. I think that there's an insurance policy that kind of comes into it a little bit where your rotation on the big league side and your level of competition doesn't fall off dramatically now losing Cease and not having any security blanket behind it. But is Nick Pavetta Dylan Cease? No. I think the potential
Mhm.
is there for it, and there's always been that upside with somebody like Pavetta, but ultimately Cease has been the more productive top of the rotation starter. So on the best possible outcome, yeah, you keep them both and they're both performing to their optimal levels. But if you end up losing Cease because they're not going to be able to re-sign him, just with all of the hints that we get with their financial situation this offseason,
Mhm.
then they get to kind of rebuild on the fly a little bit, which is really threading a needle for this organization. But I think that's what they're trying to do. And I think with an acquisition like this, okay, you can take one step forward, but only this time you won't be taking two steps back by trading Cease and getting something back for it. Maybe it's trading water and staying in a good place, but it gives them some flexibility in a
Mhm.
very tough situation, I think, for the future of this organization.
Yeah, and in signing Pavetta, they lose 500K in international signing money. They lose their second highest pick, which was 64th or number 64 in the next draft. So they'll have two picks in the top 100, 25 and 100 in 2026. But what it looks like and sound like Mike Schilt said on Wednesday that reliever Stephen Kolek will stretch out to become a starting pitcher this year. So if they're already like looking at options of guys to stretch out and filling in ways to perhaps kind of figure out, well, what do we do if we end up moving a Dylan Cease or a Michael
Mhm.
King? I think they're more motivated to move Cease at the moment. Uh, who knows with King, but maybe they're more prone to maybe hold on to him for the time being, at least to start the year, and then see where they're at the deadline. But Cease specifically, it seems like let's kind of create some backup plans in case of emergency and see what happens with Cease.
Yeah, I think one, just on the surface, Cease is going to be getting paid the most out of anybody,
Yeah.
in the upcoming deals. And so I think they're a little bit more cautiously optimistic for somebody like King, whose future value has been suppressed by his time as a reliever. Um, and when kind of going down that role, this deal is similar to what I expected to be the big splash from the Padres, which was making, and it's right in line with what you're saying, which was a bullpen conversion project. The
Mm,
name specifically I had in mind was Jeff Hoffman, and he had his own little saga this offseason with the Blue Jays and the physical. And I think he's ultimately remaining a bullpen piece. But they've shown also the ability to develop somebody like a Michael King. They've shown the
mhm.
most in their ability to get the most out of the ability of their pitchers, I should say. So I like the creativity from this organization. I think that sometimes though they just take bigger swings that are necessary. If this team had been trying to do this last year with, let's say, a Jordan Hicks,
Mhm.
or aggressively pursuing some guys on the free agent market on that buy low opportunity to convert them, maybe they wouldn't be in this problem quite the same way. But that's also pretty unique for most organizations in baseball. They don't dabble in that much, so they have some success. And I think that they could do it with another reliever in their arsenal, but not everybody's made to be a starter too. So they're thin on number 5 options, that's for sure.
Yeah. So I think really at the end of the day, that's the top storyline in question to watch for with the Padres in spring training is what happens, what does their ultimate end roster look like? Because we've talked about the turmoil and the owners voted for Seidler's brother, John, to really take over as the controller to control the Padres. Who knows what that happens with payroll, and there's all the other still litigations going
Sure.
on behind the scenes. So it's what does that roster look like at by the time opening day kicks off? Will there be any more moves, either of subtraction or addition, for the Padres as they go through this next month?
They're such tinkerers, they're so
Mhm.
well known for it that I wouldn't be surprised. It doesn't seem like anything is necessarily really on the horizon, but I don't think many people expected Nick Pivetta either going to San Diego,
Yeah.
or had much awareness of that. So I think that the Padres in their current form are pretty much what we're going to see. And this is a playoff caliber team.
Yeah.
Um, the thing with the Padres, though, is just as these years have gone on, it has sucked away more and more of the depth, more and more of the depth of the organization. So they don't have much margin for error if they lose, somebody in the rotation. If you Darvish has a lost season, which he's been known to do, where he's only, making 10 starts over the course of the year, that could sink this team's playoff chances in all
Mhm.
reality.
Yeah.
So there's less margin for error now. I will say though, I am totally here for Matt Waldron getting a full season
Mm.
as a knuckleballer in the big leagues. I'm all about that.
Yeah. Let 'em fly, baby.
Mhm.
But yeah, it'll be interesting to watch the Padres if they do any more tinkering. I think what was it for the Cardinals? They were talking about Arenado and trying to trade him, and the Padres are still kind of in that list of teams he would go to, or they'd had conversations with about him still. So they're
Yeah.
still in that narrow list. So it's that weird. They're in on these big names like Roki Sasaki or no, but Nolan Arenado.
Mhm.
But then they're turning around, they're signing the Connor Joes, Jason Haywards of the world to
It
replace
co-
Jerks Profar.
Sure, and like it kind of makes sense. There's a small gamble to it, because Profar just fits so well with San Diego. But I
Mhm.
also like the intangibles of a Connor Joe and a Jason Hayward. There's some really good stories, and I think for a team that's had a clubhouse or identity questions in recent seasons for
Yeah.
underperformance. Those are two pretty good pieces to add to address
Mhm.
those issues. This is a fine team. They're again, this is a team that probably had their best chance about a year or two ago, but this is still a playoff caliber team. And man, it would be wild to see Machado and Arenado on the same team, by the way.
Yeah.
There would be some real weirdness to that. And then also on Arenado, they're in on everybody. I get it. That's just the way the Padres are. Well, what fit is kind of there? Just positionally wise, I get you're adding another bat. I get that it's somebody that can have an impact, but you kind of already got Nolan Arenado, and his name is Manny Machado. So
Yeah. Yeah, who knows? You move Luis Arise so you can put Nolan at first base, which seems like still kind of a waste of his defensive talents.
Nolan Arenado, second baseman. I'm here for that.
Oh, there you go. Or put him at shortstop. He couldn't
There you
be
go.
any worse than Xander Bogaerts. Uh,
Forgetting Bogarts in the whole equation too.
but yeah, it's kind of the Padres. That's really the big one to look for with the Padres is what's that final product of the roster going to look like? Do they have any other surprises? And how's this team gonna operate as a unit moving forward?
Stars and scrubs. That kind of seems to be their best option at this point.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. But Padres still, like you're saying, still a playoff hopeful team, and hopefully they can get the most and things fall their way, and that all the
If
stuff behind the scenes can get figured out and doesn't affect them.
if the Padres played in the National League Central, how strongly would you consider them for the title?
They'd be pretty much right up there.
Right? It's kind of like where the Marlins were for the longest time. For the Marlins, for the longest time, they're just behind the Mets and the Braves and the Phillies. And if you put the Marlins in the AL Central, they would have won like 6 of the last 10 titles. It's the weirdest thing in
Yeah,
the world. So the Padres, there's a bit of bad luck, but that's true of everybody that has to deal with the Dodgers. So
yeah,
yeah, it's still a decent squad, but I think if we're talking about the Padres in 2 years, we might be talking about you need to burn it all down kind of thing. Like that feels like the line that they're walking a little bit right
yeah,
now.
absolutely. But they're figuring out answers with that rotation with Pavetta, so now that shortens some questions there for him at least, and it puts a little more pressure on the Matt Waldrons, Randy Vasquez of the world. Of okay, time to break through here, boy.
Hmm.
But fun times to be had out in San Diego. But now let's move out to the desert. Talk about our old pals, the Arizona Diamondbacks, who are also in the midst of figuring out what exactly is going on with that rotation. And we've mentioned it before, but they've got a lot of starting pitchers and only really 5 open slots in that rotation. And a lot of them are veterans that are aiming for those spots. So what's going to happen with those Padres starting pitchers?
With the Diamondbacks. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the
sorry.
complete opposite, honestly, of what the Padres situation is, where the Padres have some good high-end talent, but then zero depth behind it. Whereas the Diamondbacks obviously have the high-end talent with the acquisition of Corbin Burns, but then I think it's very questionable just how many mid-rotation guys are behind it. And what I mean by that is Zach Gallen is pretty much as proven as it can get, but it was a step backwards last year. It wasn't quite up to his par. So you hope that that's just an aberration and not a trend. But that's kind of one thing I'm looking for this year. And the same sentiment applies to Merrill Kelly, where a lot of good service. He's been a good soldier up to this point, but at the same time, if that's the guy we got last year moving forward, it's not going to be the contributor that we need. So I think the same way that sometimes getting a guy back from injury can be the best like trade deadline acquisition. We're getting our guy back.
Mhm.
Having Eduardo Rodriguez back for a full season and to a lesser extent Jordan Montgomery gives them 2 more adults in the room. Rodriguez, in particular, is somebody who's had actually a much better track record of success than I think a lot of people recognize.
Mm.
But he also just has completely lost years and along the way, and that's what last year was too. So we could be very surprised where that is the answer to their problems all along, is somebody that's been on the roster and just overlooked. And then lastly, the Diamondbacks also have, I think it was the 2019 class that still really defines a lot of the current status of their organization. And part of that
Mhm.
is the pitching trifecta of Ryan Nelson, Brandon Pfaadt, and Dre Jameson. I think Pfaadt's the most likely. There's still time for Pfaadt to step up as a number two type and maybe somebody to join him. If one of those guys, Jameson in particular, who is just wild when he flings it, can join him in the rotation, this is a really deep rotation that can afford to basically not put a guy out there every fifth day who would be getting the ball for most teams around the league. So they're kind of envious, but you also need to squint to see things going right for it to go well beyond just Corbin Burns this year.
Yeah. And you look at that rotation and yeah, they have the length and depth and looking at roster resource, they have it projected out to a 6-man rotation. That's not happening probably. Like if I was a betting man, probably not. But the only guy in there that has options is Brandon Pfaadt. And so I wonder if it's one of those scenarios where we could, if depending on how spring training goes for some of these guys, if you look at Fott and say, well, we don't want to just have him sitting wasting away in the bullpen as a long man because we have somebody else there and he's better valued as a starter, but he's kind of getting squeezed out. Do you see a scenario where they send him down to start the year in AAA just because he gets squeezed out because of these other guys, or do they just bite the bullet and say, well, Jordan Montgomery, yeah, we don't want you here anymore. We're gonna bite
Yeah.
that bullet. See ya.
I I think that you use the option in FOT, and I think that the majority of teams around the league would operate this way, where you basically give Montgomery one last chance to prove that he can be a contributor on this team. And then if it's not going well, they've shown in the past that they're not afraid to cut bait midseason.
Yeah.
Honestly, when they got rid of Madison Bumgarner, that's when everything kind of turned around for them, and they became a World Series team after that. So,
Mhm.
not to say that that's what the golden ticket is for them, but it obviously makes a lot of sense to utilize that last option for Fott and then see what you got left out of Montgomery. And I think you're hopefully won't see them as eager to get rid of Jordan Montgomery as they've already proven to be up to this point. But honestly, if he goes out and pitches to the tune of a 7-something ERA over his first 6 weeks, there's going to be a lot of unhappy people, and I could see them moving on from him pretty quickly.
Mhm. Yeah, but it's do or die. He's getting paid that money. He'll probably get the top look. But yeah,
Yeah.
short leash there.
And I do like the fit actually of a long man for Montgomery. The interesting thing is when Jordan Montgomery was an acquisition for the Texas Rangers and kind of helped carry them to that playoff, that World Series ring, he was utilized in a little bit, not just as a starter. For
Mhm.
Texas, he had that experience as kind of the fireman for those that remember the Andrew Miller days. So he has some versatility to him. Problem is he's just been getting spanked last year, so it doesn't matter what role he was in. But I like that fit for him as a possibility. The problem is I think the contract just won't justify the organization using him in a lesser role than anything else, than like a number three starter because that's what they're paying him for.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's not a lot of huge questions, but definitely one to watch in spring training. But I think one for me especially is can their bullpen just kind of get, I guess, solidified a little bit more? It seemed like that's kind of one of their weaker spots. Not that it's an awful bullpen, but doesn't carry as much weight or I guess pedigree as their rotation has. The bullpen still the slight question mark, but definitely plenty of good arms out there.
Yeah.
But that's
I
one that's going to be
think
interesting. Like Seth Martinez is the newest addition that they claimed off waivers back in November. But other than that, they haven't really touched that bullpen much.
it's unproven is the word that I would like
Yeah.
to use. I think for this team, and I think that the bullpen is very talented, but you no longer have a Paul Sewald. You no longer have a name brand closer
Yeah.
on this team, and I think that that's where the scary part is. Personally, I love AJ Puck. I think that he is awesome, but there are some health concerns that come with him. So
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of very high upside arms. I also like that they incorporate someone like a Ryan Thompson and they're not afraid to utilize him consistently just because it's a change of look kind of guy. So it
Mhm.
increases the effectiveness of their bullpen usage. And I think that they've demonstrated that as an organization. And, it could be as simple as Kevin Ginkel becomes the next dude, out of nowhere,
Mhm.
that he's that late stage career closer. Because you certainly saw the capabilities of how that he could work. So
Mhm.
I agree with you that there's question marks and it's maybe a young bullpen, but I give them the benefit of the doubt because they have some interesting arms, and we've already seen that they've learned to manage bullpens well enough in the past.
Yeah, and they've spent the offseason adding a couple of other minor league deals. They recently added John Curtis, former Rocky legend, 3
With
games.
2 S's, John
Yeah, 2 S's.
Curtis. Curtis's.
But, they added him on a minor league deal recently, non-roster invite, Jeff Brigham, back in December, and then Josh Winder, either of the your, but, back in January. So they've added a little bit, but looks like they have their guys in there. It's just seeing who can really solidify and break through as the dude for
Mhm.
them. Now
And
coming stretch.
honestly, if it's not working out, they can address it at the trade deadline too.
Yeah,
If anything is available at a trade deadline, it's good relievers on struggling teams. So, yeah, again, if any spot to leave questionable heading into the season, bullpen is probably the best one to choose.
yeah. And luckily, it's the one that's often most easy to fill up
Yeah.
throughout a season. Like if
Exactly. It's the most volatile. The best laid plans for bullpens can go by the wayside,
yeah,
So that's I'm fine with that being a question mark, but I'm also completely understand the players that they put there and could easily see how it can be a successful bullpen.
yeah. But other than that, like the lineup, aside from like figuring out what exactly they're going to do in the DH spot to replace, no, just really fill in whatever offensive prowess you lose from Christian Walker. So far, it looks like they're going to go with a Randall Grichuk, Pavin Smith type of platoon in the
Mhm.
DH role.
And
That's the one spot in the lineup you're like, I don't know how this is going to turn out.
I could see an instance where Lourdes Gurriel gets pushes out of the outfield mix because it's working out so well with a McCarthy, Thomas, Carroll outfield and Grichuk being, the
Mhm.
platoon. I think that it's an open competition for DH, but it's also the backup option for some of their other guys. So
Yeah,
they have some good names on there. Eugenio Suarez is not the greatest third baseman anymore. He hasn't been for some time, but he sure can hit some dingers. And so
yeah,
that's another option that can go into that DH role. So, looking over their roster more, it's a good balance of youth and veteran.
yeah,
And I think that you don't get to say this about too many teams out there. The last thing that I'll finish with Arizona, this year feels like a big year because how many more years do you think we have left with peak Ketel Marte? That's a big piece for their team. Him and Corbin Carroll are 1A, 1B in terms of the offensive impact. And I don't know, Ketel is not Corbin Carroll. He's not 22, So
yeah,
I'm curious, how many more years do we have left with Pete Ketel in the desert?
yeah. And Marte is signed through 2027 and has a club option for 2028. So
30, what, 34, 35 seasons? Ages 34
yeah,
and 35 seasons?
yeah. So
35-year-old second basemen are not typically the cornerstones for
yeah,
championship lineups.
this is true. Yeah,
Jeff
it's like,
Kent disagrees with me, I'm sure, somewhere out there, but
but it's like when it comes to the Arizona Diamondbacks, you look at that roster, like we're saying, there's not a whole lot of questions. Like the storylines to watch is just who can step up in the bullpen. How's that rotation
and
going to finally shape out? And can the new guys just contribute in the lineup?
And can you do it to start the season? That's where it is with
Yeah.
Arizona. There's no question with Arizona and the product that they're putting on the field. The question is, how effective are they going to be at implementing their strategies? Because with Arizona, even in their World Series year and last year especially, a slow and sluggish starts really hindered their chances as a playoff team. They made it by the skin of their teeth and ended up going all the way to the World Series. They tried to make it by their skin of their teeth again last year and couldn't do it. So um, they're they're in a good spot, and I think everybody recognizes the talent on the team, not only on the big league team, but also this is still a team with Jordan Lawler, one of the best shortstop prospects in all of baseball, and Drew Jones, which you want to talk about
Yeah.
name brand prospects. Drew Jones is definitely one of them. So there's either more reinforcements on the way, or they also have the pieces there where if a Pavin Smith, if injuries occur, whatever, they could beat the price for pretty much anybody when it comes to a big player on the trade market too, if they wanted to with some of the prospects they saw
Yeah.
in their pipeline.
Yeah. So I think maybe like the storyline to watch really in spring training too is which prospect is on the cusp of breaking through? Do they have a superstar in the waitings, in the wings, waiting to break through? And can they prove it in spring training? Can Jordan Lawler, or Drew Jones come out and just turn some heads in spring training and put themselves on notice of the Diamondbacks? Like, oh,
Yeah.
we'll start
I think
thinking about these guys a little bit more.
Yeah, Jones is further away, and Jones still has a lot more left to prove. Lawler
Yeah.
had just a lost year. It's one of those hit by pitch, broke a small bone in his wrist, and then came back and pulled a hamstring or whatever it was. So, I still really believe in Lawler, just as the baseball watcher in me. I think this is somebody that is an all-star easily, and he kind of has a Royce Lewis feel, where with
Yeah.
the Twins, it's like just get him on the field and it's gonna work. I swear to God, but it's
Hmm.
just a matter of getting him on the field. And so Royce Lewis is a very high bar, but I see a lot of the same abilities with Lawler, and you just need to see him get 130 games in a big league
Yeah.
season. That's really all it is at this point.
Yeah. So yeah, high hopes for the Arizona Diamondbacks. Pretty high on him, and it's good to feel about that team in the West. But speaking of a team trying to get a guy just on the field, we're talking Colorado Rockies, and what the heck is Kris Bryant going to do in 2025? That's There's plenty of questions and storylines for the Rockies, but this has been the big one on people's minds. As Kris Bryant, notably the $182 million man, has played in just 159 games over his first 3 seasons in Colorado due to a myriad of injuries. Most
All
recently, yeah,
just
all
all
of
the
them with the
injuries.
all of the injuries he can think of. He's been hit in the hand. He's had problems with plantar fasciitis, and then last season was a lot of problems with his back, which has bothered him quite a bit with a degenerative back issue condition that's really hurt him these last 3 seasons. And the messaging for the Rockies keeps being like, well, if we can get him on the field to be our superstar and the Kris Bryant we think he can be, we know he can be. If he does that, we'll be in much better shape.
Sure.
But Kenneth, how much can we rely on Kris Bryant in 2025?
You can't. When was the last time that, and they coined the term aircraft carrier? When was the last time that Kris Bryant was really that? So this
Mm,
is going to be 2018, 2019. Kris Bryant. We're talking before basically blew out the shoulder pre-pandemic. Just it's not that guy's not there anymore. So um, you hope that you can get something because at this point the production that's come from Bryant in the term of this deal has been abysmal. It's been embarrassing and honestly kind of one of the ugliest in sports in general during this past couple of year stretch. But then on the other side of the coin, what really, gets to me is let's say Kris Bryant does have a career rejuvenation in 2025. Realistically, in my head, I see 135 games played,
yeah,
20 home runs, 25 home runs, maybe like a
I'd
110.
take 25.
It's 25 is the high end, but I can see him like with a 21 home run kind of year. Let's say
Hmm.
20 to 25 and like a 110 WRC plus. Very respectable, very good year, very solid year, borderline all-star year kind of thing. How much does that change the Rockies? You insert Kris Bryant as your prototypical, very solid number 5 hitter. This is a 71 win team, 75 win
Yeah,
team.
it
Is that in
improves a
there?
bit, but the problems are still vast. Like he doesn't move
75
the
is very
needle that
generous.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. If you get that, and let's say Tyro Estrada is twice what Brendan Rodgers is this year, you end up doubling the value for half the cost. He wins a batting title even. Whoa, that's still a sub 500 team. There's so much more that's going on with the Rockies that if you get Kris Bryant to be productive at this point, it's it's icing on the cake a little bit. Like, you can't
Mhm.
expect it anymore, and the worst part about it is it doesn't really matter if Kris Bryant really is productive anymore. It just makes you feel a little bit better about the contract. That's kind of where
Yeah.
things are at right now.
Yeah, and that's the big thing because, over on Fangraphs, if you look at all the projections, uh, on the optimistic end, they're like 112 games played, 13, 14 home runs, and then hits like 245 with a on base about 420, 325, and then a slugging somewhere in the range close to 400.
Mhm.
Like, they're pretty modest and like, it's
Pretty league average player
yeah, exactly. It's like,
while missing a decent amount of games.
it's not awful production, but for what he's getting paid and the priority or like emphasis the Rockies are putting on, we need him to play and be a superstar. It feels misplaced.
The ship
Yeah,
sailed. Everybody knew
he's
it.
he's not he's not what you we knew
Yeah.
this when you signed him. Like, it's been worse off than perhaps anybody probably imagined, but it still hasn't been good for him. And because even when he has been on the field, it hasn't been very productive there, Kenneth.
No, and he doesn't really have a defensive home either. That's one thing with the Rockies. It's beside the point. It's definitely not the biggest of the problems, but they also don't know where they want to put him in comparison to all the other pieces that they have around too. Is he a first baseman? Is third base ever an option for him anymore? Is he strictly both corners or just one outfield spot? They've never really known to do with their new purchase since they bought it, and so it's just kind of sat in the corner and collected dust. Like, that's the way that this has gone between the team and the player. And at this point, I think they're both just going to kind of wait it out. But the only other option, and I think this is very far fetched, knowing how the Rockies operate, is a bad contract swap. And who else is possibly out there? I think that that's a fun thought exercise. Maybe the exercise just begins and ends with Javier Baez, and that's it. I don't know, but that's the only possibility of this working out any differently, other than everybody just waits until the final year of the deal, and then they cut bait. Like, that's
Yeah,
the way it's driving.
yeah, it really, really feels like that. But all of that kind of brings up other storylines to watch is what young Rockies outfielders or younger players can break through to kind of overtake Bryant, like Michael Toglia did in 2024. He was injured and he gets supplanted by Michael Toglia at first base. But now you can't imagine anybody but Michael Toglia at first base coming into the season. And the Rockies claim that he'll only play defense and right field on the road, and that Jordan Beck will get the most looks there and could factor in at home. But who can just slide in and say, "No, right field's mine, Chris. You go hit the pine."
I think they're really banking on it being Jordan Beck. First of all, the whole you only play defense at one spot half the time is such a weird notion the Rockies are doing. Like, he's only a road defensive player. Part of it is the environment that they exist in, so I get how why this happens with just the Rockies, but that's such a weird sentence to me. So I just I at
Mhm.
least wanted to acknowledge
It's
it.
a weird point.
But so Jordan Beck is the one that I think they've been the highest on from the get go. As soon as they drafted Jordan Beck, I think they were salivating at a big league player, and they were aggressive in pushing him into the lineup. I wonder in hindsight if that was the best for him, but I think that he has the inside track at being that starter. I think the Rockies close their eyes, and their dream outfield right now is left to right Nolan Jones, Bretton Doyle, and Jordan Beck, while
Mhm.
utilizing Kris Bryant as a DH and apparently go play right field when they're in Atlanta. That's
Yeah,
that's the plan.
yeah, it's weird, but Chris Bryant, he's just his status and health and where he fits into this team that doesn't need him and never needed him, but for
Mhm.
some reason signed him, so they're stuck with him. But it's what's the over under on him basically going the Anthony Rendon route, suffering some sort of injury that knocks him out for most of the season. This one's lost.
Yeah, it's like 57.5. Do you see him playing like more than 55 games kind of thing? I think is the number.
Mhm.
With with Bryant's status and then also with Jordan Beck trying to have the inside track at a job, this also creates an opportunity, I think, for the Rockies. You hope that somebody like Yanquiel Fernandez or Zach Veen steps up. I think a lot of people would expect Charlie Condon to be in the conversation, but give it some time, let him have a full year. Um, what would be really bad for the Rockies, and there's an absolutely a world where this exists, is where the the, the development gets set back another year for a Veen, for a Montgomery, for a Yanquiel Fernandez, and we end up seeing that right field slash DH role produce 500 at bats for a Greg Jones and a Sam Hilliard,
Yeah.
and a Keston Hira ends up getting the majority of the playing time. So I think that that's the one thing for a lot of Rockies fans. It's not something really great to watch for. There's not much worth talking about with this organization, if we're being painfully honest. But that's one thing to really keep an eye on is how much playing time is actually going to go to some of these young guys this year, because
Yeah.
there's only so many Matt Adams years you can have before you start losing hair over it.
Yeah, and that's kind of brings up this next thing we can touch on real quick before we move on is will they stay true to their word and embrace the youth? They keep saying, "Oh, we're going to probably be working younger this season. We're going to turn to those guys." Do they actually do it? Will be the question like you're talking about. And specifically, the place they can I think make the most track in this, gain the most ground is in that bullpen where we saw in the later half of 2024 a lot of good young arms showing up. Victor Vodnik was there throughout the year. But then we saw Seth Halverson show up late in the year. Luis Peralta, Jaden Hill made an appearance, and Angel Chivilli, Louis, and some of these guys showed up near the end of the year or at various points, turned some heads, and all of a sudden a bullpen that looked really weak coming in. You get a lot of these young, hard throwing young throwing pitchers. All of a sudden, you're getting a little bit more optimistic about their bullpen chances, at least the formation of their bullpen.
Yeah, and to the same extent that we talked about the Diamondbacks being an unproven group, maybe a young group, but having good upside, that same sentiment applies with this Rockies bullpen. I think that you just have less high leverage experience with this group. They didn't have Kevin Ginkel going through a playoff run. They haven't been there. They haven't done that. So we saw some bumps and bruises with Victor Vodnik, but it sure seems like they're earmarking him for kind of a closer role or
Mhm.
that late inning reliever. And then Peralta was somebody that really came onto their radar as soon as they brought him into the organization. So one, I'm looking at the bullpen and I'm seeing the names also being external acquisitions. And there's not many spots on this roster where external acquisitions are relied upon or make much of an impact. So that's nice to see. It's a thing with the Rockies. And so you're seeing some high upside arms starting to arrive. There's going to be some bumps and some bruises along the way, but I think
Mhm.
Jaden Hill totally can be a wipeout closer for them. I think that Halverson has a giant arm that could absolutely be, an impact late inning arm. So it's an interesting young group. It's a young group that's still going to go through some pains, but it's also no longer a group where they're just assuming Daniel Bard will fix everything,
Yeah.
And so I like the perspective that they're making with this bullpen. It's healthier than it was in previous years.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot to watch, and there's a lot of other things we could talk about, but for the sake of time, we won't. And we'll also save it for conversations of other weeks. Yeah, a lot to watch for with the Rockies there. But moving along, we move to the juggernaut team, out to Los Angeles, to the Dodgers, who, well, as we talked about last week, did they really have a bad move of the offseason? They keep adding people. They added Kike Hernandez back. They added Clayton Kershaw back. Surprise, surprise, he's back.
Surprise. Yeah.
Who knows when he'll pitch again because he had another offseason surgery thing. Old man,
Yeah,
but
the effectiveness of Clayton Kershaw right now, like it's nice. It's nice that there's a open-ended 1-year contract for a future Hall of Famer in one organization.
yeah,
Like it's cool that that scenario still exists. But really, how much do you expect out of Clayton Kershaw? I think it's hard to expect more than 10 starts out of Clayton Kershaw at this point in
yeah.
a given season. You know?
hmm But But that brings up, I think, one big question for me, and I think for a lot of folks, is perhaps the one glaring thing with the Dodgers amidst all the things they've done is the durability of that rotation, which they are going into a six-man rotation to accommodate, the likes of Roki Sasaki, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, and just all these guys they have. They have so many options in the rotation. They can
Yeah.
only carry so many of them at the big league level, and they'll have guys down in the minors. They'll just serve as depth pieces. But it's how is that all going to work with that rotation with all the guys they have? Will the rotation be enough even with the caliber of players they have? And Shohei will enter it back in May. He won't start the season in the rotation, but he's expected to be back in May to pitch. How much of an impact will this rotation have to carry him throughout the season?
I'm curious to see how many mysterious arm injuries, how many dead arms, 10-day IL stints
Yeah.
occur for the Dodgers this year. Because like I honestly think that they have enough pieces obviously around to figure it out. And then
Mhm.
you're preparing for the inevitability that one of their toys is going to break. And so, they're going to have backups on hand. But I'm curious just how many times they're going to just decide, you know what, Tyler Glass now? We saw that uh, half a mile an hour dip in your average fastball velocity in your last two starts. We're shutting it down, kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so um, they'll find a way to make it work. And I think that they also have a couple of options to work with some young guys. When we talk about like a Gavin Stone or a Bobby Miller, these were guys that have been a little turbulent in their big league history. They've shown these huge flashes, these huge potentials, but they haven't been able to consistently put it together. So that's developmental time that they'll be able to buy as part of the process. And so it's nice because they don't have to worry about it. They have Ohtani, they have Snell, they have Yamamoto, they have all these other options. Let a Bobby Miller go figure it out in the minors for 2
Mhm.
months kind of thing. So that's the spot they put themselves in, and everybody hates them for it.
Yeah. They're the rich kid who, "Oh, well, my toy broke. Don't worry, I have 3 other I can play with."
I own the company. It's fine.
Yeah, I own the company. I can just my uncle works in Nintendo. He can get me a new one.
He is Mr. Nintendo.
Yeah. His
And that's
name's
what Dustin
Mario.
May, yeah, you have Dustin May and Tony Gonsolin still coming back from surgery too, and so it's not just Ohtani. Obviously, Ohtani gets the headline because 'cause it'll be a two-way, and I think you probably look at Ohtani and you put him in a position where you say, "We don't want 32 starts out of you. We want 20. We want a six-man rotation specifically because we have Ohtani, and we're only going to bring that in months, the second half of the season or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, I think the Dodgers are smart enough and have the resources on hand to do something like that. So I think that's the way it goes with them is a true six-man rotation.
Yeah, and it helps that you have 3 Japanese pitchers who are used to that kinda schedule of maybe pitching once a week so you can cycle it through a little bit more and,
Mhm.
maybe one of those guys is available for as a long reliever earlier one of those days type of
Yeah,
thing.
maybe Clayton Kershaw's in town and he's here for one of
Yeah.
his 10 starts. That's part of the six man. So I think that's the way it goes with them. But who knows? Maybe they lose six guys to elbow injuries in spring training, and we're like, well, good thing they had depth because now they're down to four starters,
Mhm.
kind of thing. So that totally could happen.
Yeah. And, they'll have a little bit more urgency here in spring training as they get ready for that Tokyo series. That'll be the fun thing of seeing, well, how's that gonna pan out and just what will it look like? Who's gonna start? And
Mhm.
sound like Yamamoto and Sasaki probably would get the starts for those series. So that'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, I mean Sasaki just in general, his first big league start is going to be very interesting. Um, watching Yamamoto last year because didn't he also debut overseas? Or am I maybe I'm
Yes.
misremembering
Maybe
that.
did he start in because they played in Japan last year, didn't they?
I thought it was San Diego and LA. But regardless, some of those like 2 AM games when you're trying to see a guy for the first time, it's not the best. But
Mhm.
so Sasaki be much watched TV. And I think for baseball, promoting their product and putting him on an international market in his first day, that's pretty good marketing choice.
Yeah. It's like you look at the Dodgers in general, and it's like, oh, what questions or like what storylines can you watch or think about with them? And
How
there aren't
bad
a
will their
whole
new City Connect jersey be? That's the big headline with the Dodgers this year.
it's who else will they get to add on? But yeah, they just keep
Nolan
adding.
Arenado, honestly.
Yeah.
You look at
Who
the Dodgers. How much more time is left with Max Muncy, Chris Taylor, Kike Hernandez, those guys getting significant at bats and being relied upon big league players? Muncy, you see, he's already a three true outcome guy, so it's weird in the first place, but you see just a little bit less from him each year. Chris Taylor
Mhm.
had a huge step back. Kike Hernandez was brought back for charismatic purposes, I think. I don't really know. Like Kike is just a beloved Dodger. And so how much longer, do we start having before a Max Muncy they finally cut ties with him? Like that is
Yeah.
a very real thing with the Dodgers. But we're talking about how much longer do they stick with their 8-hole hitter that still puts up an 800 OPS. So
Yeah.
you know,
That guy's the 3-hole hitter for most other teams.
yeah.
But yeah, Max Muncy his 2025 is his final guaranteed year. There is a 10 million club option for 26. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Oh, they'll just who's the top third baseman free agent coming out next season?
Yeah, it's that or what prospect did the Dodgers just spin into gold, Dalton Rushing style,
Mhm.
where it's just like, yeah, he was a second round pick, and now all of a sudden he's the best third base prospect in all of baseball. So you expect that with the Dodgers, but that's the thing; they're the gold standard for a reason. They do it well in so
Mhm.
many areas that now you look at them and like, I wonder how they're going to upgrade from their all star third baseman. Like
Uh,
that's
they'll
why we talk about the Dodgers.
they'll sign Bo Bichette and either slot him in at third or Mookie.
Vladdy Jr. to the Dodgers, I think, is a very real world. I don't know what they
Uh,
want to do with them necessarily, but Vladdy Jr. to the Dodgers, I could totally see happening.
don't you put that evil on me, Ricky Bobby.
Just the DH, but yeah, I mean, Bo Bichette's another name too. That's the thing with the Dodgers. You're looking for what their next big impact move is going to be, and
Yeah.
that's it. They're in such a good place. It's going to be a fun team to watch, other than the whole seeing the Dodgers thing.
Yeah. The players will be fun to watch. The team,
Mm. Yeah.
yeah. They're an aging team. Fun thing. But yeah, we'll see what happens with the Dodgers as usual. Can they make it through? Because
How do they? Oh, my question is how do they carry over this title core to the next title core? I think somebody like a Will Smith is the perfect bridge guy between the old guard of the Clayton Kershaws and Muncies and stuff like that, and to the new wave of guys. And I think there's fair criticism with the new wave of guys because of Miguel Vargas hasn't worked out. And Josh Outman was supposed to
yeah,
be a big league regular by right now, and so Gavin Lux, we spent a lot of time this offseason talking about him. So there is fair criticism about it. But again, if it doesn't work out, you just turn around and you sign Freddie Freeman and it solves all your problems. So that's the backup
yeah,
option if they're not replacing some of these aging players very well. That's always in their back pocket.
yeah. And those are questions for farther in the future. But who knows? The bill will always come due, as they say in Doctor Strange.
Good. Strange reference. I love it. What about the
But
Giants?
yeah, well, moving on to the Giants for our final team talk. Uh, I think the one for me, we could start off here, is again keeping up that theme of the starting rotation. That's kind of been the question we've talked about for all these teams in pitching in some sense. We could have talked about it for the Rockies too, because it's just always implied. But is that rotation? Did they do enough for that rotation, or is that rotation going to be enough to help them take a leap forward this season? With really the addition of Justin Verlander, their really big addition in that rotation.
I think it's competitive enough. Just on the surface, I think it's competitive enough starting with a Logan Webb, who's kind of that underappreciated ace. And I
Mhm.
think somebody like a Kyle Harrison is has all the trademarks of being a good homegrown number two. I think that and Jordan Hicks, we talked about it with the Padres and that reliever conversion therapy, but they did it pretty well with Jordan Hicks last year for San Francisco. So I don't think that anybody is going to confuse this with the best rotation in baseball, but I think that this is a playoff caliber rotation. Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely.
And I think a lot of that will hinge on, can Justin Verlander at 40 some odd years old, can he still reach into his old bag of tricks, step back in time and find some magic to be to maybe not entirely vintage, but even go back a few years when he won the Cy Young,
Mhm.
be able to return to form in San Francisco. I think that's going to be what we all have eyes on in spring training. Of can Verlander still do it for the Giants this year?
You're not very far removed from close to peak Verlander. It's
Yeah.
just 2 years ago in 2023 when he's a Cy Young caliber pitcher. The problem is 2024 was also such a significant drop down from that 2023 season, and you're this much, the side of 40 that he's on keeps on getting wronger and wronger with each
Mm,
passing day. So, it's just fair to question how much is left in the tank with Verlander. It's not Clayton Kershaw. You hope have 15 starts bad, but I think it's unreasonable to expect that you're going to get 32 starts out of Justin Verlander, and then it really comes down to how close to cooked is he?
yeah.
That's just all it is how much is left in the tank is really what you need to see. The nice part is you're always in the right environment to take a chance on an arm and in San Francisco. So he's in a place where even if he's not that effective of a player anymore, he can probably get away with it a little bit, at least for a while. So that's always why it's a good fit bringing a pitcher into San Francisco.
Yeah. And it's that thing of like you're saying, the Giants have proven they can take maybe a little aged arm, an injured arm from and help him bounce back and have a solid year.
Mhm.
And that's what they'll be doing with Verlander again. Look at what they'll be trying to do with Robbie Ray this
That's
season
the
as well.
name. Yeah, that's the name that I wanted to hit on because it feels like Robbie Ray is almost more important than it
Mm,
is for a Justin Verlander. I think it's gravy, whatever you get out of Verlander to an extent, but you gave up assets for Ray. You still are paying a pretty decent price for a Robbie Ray. And again, this is somebody that's not too far removed from Cy Young caliber, peak seasons kind of thing. So um, if you get a productive number 3, number 4 type of year out of those 2 combined, I think it's a success, right? Like, that's
mhm.
kind of the way I would see it.
Yeah, because you have Logan Webb anchoring it, one of the best in baseball. If you get those two, it really helps solidify, and then you can cycle through the Jordan Hicks and some of the other younger guys to see, okay, who's going to slot in and really help us solidify this rotation. That's what you hope for.
Yeah. And Keaton Wynn, I think, was getting some run last year. Again, it's decent enough. I'm not going to be blown away by it, and I think there's always something with Logan Webb where I'm just expecting, some regression to occur or some injury to happen. But you ride with that durability and that horse that he's proven to be. So I think a lot rides on Logan Webb. I'll put it that way. If Logan Webb goes down for an extended period of time, I feel much differently about this pitching staff as a whole. So he
Yeah,
carries a lot of weight for this team. Is how I
absolutely.
feel.
Yeah, and it's getting pointed out to us by Patrick. The Giants rotation does have everything: a future Hall of Famer in Justin Verlander, a former Cy Young Award winner in Robbie Ray and Verlander, and
Mhm.
a perennial Cy Young Award candidate in Logan Webb. So they got all their bases covered there, Kenneth.
Yeah, and they have one of the two Rogers brothers as well. They used to have both of them in the
Yeah,
bullpen.
could you imagine if you had both of them?
It's not quite Detroit. What was it? 2012 rotation where they had the four Cy Young winners, but yeah, it's an interesting group. That's the whole thing with the Giants. It's not quite the good mix that Arizona is of youth and veteran, but it's a
Yeah.
decent one. It's not quite the high end talent of a San Diego, but it's pretty decent. It's not as bad as Colorado, but it's pretty decent. So they're just kind of in between and mid right now. I think how much are we going to get out of a Verlander and a Ray? I think helps their chances for a year. It's more important how close to the ceiling of a Kyle Harrison
Yeah.
are you with? How close are you to adding more veteran arm or more young arms to support this
Mhm.
rotation? I think that's the bigger question for San Fran
Yeah.
this year.
And so that's what the rotation. Then, real quick, we'll finish here talking about a little bit about their offense and some of their players. First off, it's can Jung Hoo Lee actually break out and have a good really first full season in San Francisco after he appeared in just 37 games last year before having to get right shoulder surgery had a right shoulder injury back in May. Looks like ready to go, slot in back in center field. That's the storyline is what can Jung Hoo Lee bring to this Giants team that they were probably banking on last season and just didn't get.
Yeah, I think that was the question heading into last season too, and we just still don't know. So that's the unfortunate part. I think in the small bit that we got, this is going to be a good defensive center fielder. I don't necessarily put him elite. I don't think he's going to be taking Gold Gloves from Brenton Doyle necessarily, but it's going to be a good center field in a very large center field to play. So definite bonus, and I think that it's going to be a good contact and speed player. You hope that you're getting a 2020 guy kind of thing. I think, which would be a perfect top, contributor and complement to a Willy Adames. But if this is the power source they've been waiting for years and years, I think they're going to be disappointed. So that's just the initial feeling. But again, we're asking the same questions that we were asking heading into last year. So don't really know yet.
Yeah, I've been seeing, but we'll see. It's just interesting to see. I'm excited to see what he can do because we only got such a little bit of him last season. But
it's a decorated Japanese player. We have a decorated career to go off of. And I'm sorry, he was in the KBO, but it's still a very decorated professional that they're adding in. It's just I don't think this is the guy that solves all their problems. They've still needed bigger fish. It's a good compliment, but it's supposed to be a good compliment for a bigger guy in that lineup. I don't think he's supposed to be the cornerstone guy.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to ask here to close out is the question that I have is, will the Giants regret not doing more this offseason to address their offense? Like Willy Adames, great. No, locking up Matt Chapman, great. You hope for Jung Hoo Lee to come back, but are you going to regret that they didn't do more?
I don't look at it as just this offseason in my answer. I look at this as a combination of multiple off seasons because outside of Juan Soto, who are the biggest impact players maybe on the free agent market this year? We spend a lot of time talking about Pete Alonso, obviously. And then there's Roki Sasaki. Sasaki's his own thing. So I think they should have done more, but I think they've had the opportunity to have done more in the past couple of years. So if they expected this to be the year where everybody signed, they were once again let down. It was supposed to be incremental, and they just haven't had those incremental signings up to this point, which is why we feel just Willy Adames alone feels lackluster. That's the kicking myself part that I think the Giants are feeling, but it's compounded through multiple years.
Yeah, and they've run into where like hitters weren't wanting to come to San Francisco. And man, if they get Arson Judge a few years ago, man,
Yeah.
they're probably a whole different team.
If you had been adding Adames to an Arson Judge, then yeah, you feel like you're doing enough now. But they've missed in the past couple of years. So I think there's still one or two big acquisitions away from really being the team that we're thinking they could be.
Be interesting stuff. And real quick here, before we close off here, breaking news as the Alex Bregman saga appears to be over as he is signed with the Boston Red Sox for 3 years, $120 million, according to The Athletic. And there's a couple of opt-outs after each season. Sounds like he had other 6 years and like more than $170 million offers elsewhere, but goes with the higher AAV value with the opt-outs. Boston has been connected to Arenado. Does this open the door for Arenado to go to the Dodgers or the Padres?
Sure. Yeah, I think anytime that you have Bregman moving, it directly impacts Nolan Arenado's market. So yes, I do think that it affects it. I think Houston is still not completely closed the door on bringing Arenado in. I know Paredes got added on. So Bregman has always felt like it was either Houston or Boston to me, and I'm curious what this does with their relationship with Rafi Devers and moving him off of third base because that seems like the best fit. I like it for Boston overall. I'm curious if there's weird trickle effects from the signing, though, within their clubhouse. And also, how much closer does this bring them to a Yankees and an Orioles? They still feel like a good class below, That's
Yeah.
my first impression.
It's a chance for them at least to try and make a run in 2025 because Story can opt out after this
Mhm.
season. So, if
And
things
with
don't go their
really
way,
good,
then
yeah.
boom, Story and Bregman could both opt out, and well, they're back to figuring out what to do with Rafael Devers, which presumably now Devers goes to first base.
Or DH because you still have Cassis, right?
Yeah,
So I think that this expedites the move of somebody like Cassis
yeah,
to slide Devers over to third base. Um, I don't know. I think that there's still one more move to make with it. It's a good veteran group for Boston. And also, this is a good defensive player to add for a team that's added quite a bit of pitching this
yeah,
offseason, too. So I like it for their defensive purposes on the infield because that's a big upgrade going from Devers to Bregman at third base, in my opinion.
yeah. Interesting stuff. But hey, if they trade
Breaking news to start, breaking news to finish.
there you go. Boom, baby. That's how we planned it out. Thank you, MLB free agents. Uh, I'd laugh if they trade Casas and then they just like right after recently showing their preview for the Netflix show, the documentary that follows the Red Sox last season.
Mhm.
And they highlight the clip of Casas after yelling
It's
at
like
himself at
having
first base.
it's like having the promo game or the bobblehead promo in the stadium for the player you just traded away.
Yeah. Hey, you don't have that problem if you only create 2 bobbleheads. Rockies.
Yeah. Yeah, promo schedule's up on the way or by the way, so
Yeah.
anybody in Colorado wants to check that out.
Sign with the Dodgers. That's probably part of the negotiations. Hey, we'll give you a bobblehead.
It's in the contract.
Yeah. Kirby Yates, you want a bobblehead? Sure.
Kirby Yates, I mean, that feels like the name of a man that should have a bobblehead. I'll say that
Hmm.
much.
He should have signed with Seattle, so then they would have had George Kirby Yates. George Kirby Yates.
The missed opportunities. It's like you have Seth Beer and Jake Berger.
Hmm.
That totally could have been just an outfield corner of burgers and beers. Never
Oh
got it.
goodness. Oh goodness. But hey, that'll do it here for this edition of Best of the West. Spring training is here. It's go time. Excited for all these things, and we'll definitely be keeping an eye on all these teams and these different storylines that we've talked about. But be sure to let us know in the comments below on the video and everything over on YouTube. You can follow Blake Street Banner over on social media and YouTube, and let us know what storylines, maybe things you're looking forward to looking at with all of these teams and questions you have for these different or your different predictions for some of these things we've talked about. But Kenneth, where can the folks find you?
Yeah, I'll be on Twitter at KDub1988, and then you can catch me over at Purple Road, dropping articles every now and then.
There we go. And you find me over on Twitter at Skyler Timmins. That's SkylerTimmins. And then over at Blue Sky, stimmins13.bsky.social. I have to spell it out, Kenneth, because I went and got a new tire today and I looked at the receipt and they spelled it LAR and then TIMMANS, which was a new one.
Oh, come on.
Timmans.
Skylar Timmans.
Yeah, so that was a new one. But
Capital A for both.
but yeah, and also find me over at purplerow.com, writing Wednesday rock piles and writing stuff over at fansfirstsports.com, as well as hosting the Rocky Mountain Rooftop Network podcast, Affected by Altitude. It's good times. But until next time, this has been Best of the West. Until next time, remember, the best is yet to come.